This is my living history project. I'll be interviewing my mother, Teresa Flynn. She grew up in the 70s and 80s, and she's going to tell me about some of the historical events that occurred around that time period. Okay, so one of the first events that she told me about, that she remembered, was the bicentennial. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Sure. The bicentennial stands for the 200th birthday of America. And at that time, this was 1976, I was 7 years old, and I was living in central New Jersey. I grew up there, and so we were fortunate to be able to take a trip to Philadelphia. That was about an hour, hour and a half away. And so my whole family got to see all of the original documents in Philadelphia. We got to see the Liberty Bell. We got to see the Declaration of Independence, and I remember it was the summer. Most people wanted to kind of get that experience in July, around July 4th. So there were a lot of people, a lot of crowds. Everyone was very excited. There was, I would say, in general, a big, a high level of enthusiasm and love for America. One of the greatest things that I had during that was that my grandmother came with us. She came to America when she was 4 years old, and she loved this country. She loved being an American citizen. She loved U.S. history, and so it really was thrilling to see how excited she was to see how this country was formed, and what a beautiful thing that it is. So that was a lot of fun.
Okay. And then a couple years later, there was the U.S. boycott of the Olympics.
Yes, that was in 1980, and so I was in elementary school. There was a lot of talk, in the nightly news and, with families and stuff about how important it was to, well, people were kind of, for and against this idea, but the president, I think it was President Carter, decided to boycott. Back then also the Olympics were a huge deal for the entire year because you had the Winter Olympics, obviously in the winter, and then the Summer Olympics, and so the entire year everything was preempted for even nightly television for these special events, and so it was a really big deal. So a lot of people were really talking about it. I do remember being in art class, and I guess my teacher had some strong opinions about it, and I think we even maybe did an art project, about the American flag and how we had to support, be loyal to our country. I do remember that this was sort of against the Russians. Communism was at its very height and about to come down, but so we were really standing against communist Russia.
Yeah. Okay, and then just the next year was the Reagan assassination?
Yeah, so after Carter, Ronald Reagan was elected, and so we went from Democrat to Republican, and there was a lot of enthusiasm for him and for a new administration, and right in that first year there was an assassination attempt. I was very young at that time, but I do remember feeling scared, and my family and even my brothers and sisters were a lot older than me, so they do remember JFK's assassination, and so thankfully Reagan survived it, but I think it threw the country into kind of a panic because there was so much remembrance about what happened with the assassinations in the 60s, and so I know I felt that it was a very important event.
Yeah. And then quite a few years later was the Iran-Contra affair.
Yeah, so that was in smack dab in the 80s. I was in high school. I was a person that was interested in current events and history. Maybe I got that from my grandma. But I do remember reading the newspaper and watching the news, and even shows like Saturday Night Live, which was around back then. They had their take on it, and so everyone had. It was really polarizing because some people thought that Reagan was in the right, and Oliver North, who was kind of the big general that was standing to be interrogated, by Congress, that they were all in the right, and some people thought they were all in the wrong. So it was kind of confusing as a teenager to try to make my own opinion, because usually there's one side, there's another side, and in the middle is the truth. And so I do recall that it was a little hard to discern what actually was, the good and bad in that situation.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then in 1989.
Oh yeah, in 1989, a lot of things happened. I had just graduated from high school. I was in college, and I do remember that the Exxon Valdez oil spill was a huge thing in the news, and of course at that time, being a young college student and very interested in social justice and the environment and all that, a lot of us were very, very angry and disappointed that this big corporation had this giant spill off the coast of Alaska, and there was a lot of coverage on the wildlife that was covered, in oil, and just, but the thing that I felt too was that there was a big outpouring of help, volunteers and otherwise, trying to clean that up. There was a sense also of injustice, like, was this big corporation going to get away with it? Were they going to be fined and held culpable? And I believe that they were, but I feel that it was a big disappointment for the American people, to know that just so easily our precious resources could be lost.
Yeah, and then there was a nice change of events where Colin Powell got elected for first Black Joint Chief of Staff.
Yes, I do remember that. Colin Powell was a Republican, and he was a career, military man, very well respected, and he was the first African American to be appointed the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And I always responded real well to his leadership. He was on the news a lot, and I always felt that he was very, calm and decisive, and to me it gave me confidence that he was part of at least part of an administration that was confidently trying to run the country.
Yeah. And then a huge world event, the Berlin Wall coming down. How'd that affect your life, and how'd you see that covered in the news and all that?
Yeah, that was to me a little confusing, a little bit of a jolt, because here I'd gone all my childhood, obviously being taught the dangers of communism, and there's this tension and still kind of the end of the Cold War, and I mean, maybe the buildup was happening more spread out, but I mean, I was a young adult, so I just kind of was like, whoa, wait a minute, the Berlin Wall's coming down. It was a really big thing, because I even had friends that were German. I lived in an area that just had a melting pot of all different ethnic groups. I had a good friend that was German, and she literally had family back in Germany, and some were on the east side of the wall and some were on the west side of the wall, and they really couldn't see each other for almost 2 generations. And so when the wall came down, it was a very big deal. And I remember Pink Floyd, they promised that they would do their famous album The Wall, that they would perform it live, if the Berlin Wall should ever come down. And so it did come down, and they did perform it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's great. Thanks for giving me some time to talk to you about these events and explain your take on them.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
All right.